Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's time for a national gun buyback. If you think gun buybacks are worthless, they're oxymorons, and they're stupid, please like and subscribe. Welcome to Lawyered Up. I'm Patrick McGee. I'm a Florida trial attorney and former police officer, and I bring you news on the Second Amendment from around Florida and around the world. So we have Gregory Koger of the University of Miami. Is a political science professor. In Washington Monthly, he penned an op-ed on August 2nd titled, "It's Time for a National Gun Buyback." So let's see what Greg is talking about. But first, whenever academics write articles like this, I love to check their background. So let's take a look at Greg. As you can see, Greg specializes in legislative politics and political parties. I'll leave a link to his profile at the University of Miami, which also has his CV in it. And you can scroll down and see that he's not a fan of the filibuster. And we'll talk about that a little bit further down in his op-ed. But I know a few college professors, and most of them live in the pretty affluent parts of town. I'm willing to bet Greg doesn't live in an area and has never lived in an area where he's had to protect himself or even run the risk of having to protect himself or his family. And you can see he did his PhD at UCLA. So it's a pretty good assumption of what his political affiliation is. I'm sure he has a D after his name. Anyway, let me hit the high points of his op-ed here. He wants to institute a national gun buyback program paid for by higher excise taxes on gun purchases, ammunition, tactical gear, and all kinds of stuff. Greg says the decades of regulation and banning the private sales of some weapons and restricting who can buy specific weapons and controlling where guns can be carried or fired and so on have been unsuccessful. Most of these proposals are advocated by gun groups such as the Brady Center to Prevent Violence, Every Town for Gun Safety. But in a modern context, these issues have three limitations. The first limitation, he says, it's impossible for Congress to enact major gun control legislation because they can't get past the 60-vote filibuster. Greg is not a fan of the filibuster, as you can see from the book that he wrote in his profile. Second, the Republican majority on the Supreme Court is skeptical of gun control laws. When have you ever heard a Supreme Court in a political majority sense, spoken of in a political majority sense? I think this is the first time. And the third reason this regulation doesn't work is no politically feasible restrictive gun law would address the enormous number of firearms already in circulation. Not that he's not willing to try. So Greg thinks that the purchase price of these gun buybacks should be tied to the weapon's market value and the likelihood of its being used in criminal activity. Under his proposals, the taxes would increase significantly, but not so high as to be prohibitive and trigger court challenges. To go further, Congress could potentially apply a progressive tax based on how dangerous a weapon is. Now get this, like placing a higher tax on an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle than a historic flintlock rifle. So here's where the emotion comes in. I mean, the guns are scary. That's why they need regulation and nothing more. And he all but admits it right here. Then he goes on, do gun buybacks work? This is choice. Critics point to cities that have purchased weapons and destroyed them, typically on a short-term basis with mixed results. Not liking that, he goes on to cite Australia's compulsive buyback in the 1990s was significant in reducing homicides and suicides. So they want to give you some money and take your guns back, is what Greg's saying. Also, in relation to the taxes, he's citing a study in 2002 by Douglas C. Bice and David Himney. And once again, I'll link to this particular article, and those links will be in here, that found that consumer demand in handgun market is highly elastic. As prices increase by 1%, demand decreases by 2 to 3%. That's interesting to know. Congress can choose a tax rate that balances the need for revenue against discouraging private weapon sales. So their tactics are going to change. They're no longer looking at regulations. They're looking at other ways to basically wipe out your Second Amendment. This is a choice paragraph here. While raising taxes is often unpopular, there's a strong economic case for taxing weapons, ammunition, and gear to reflect the costs they impose on American society that are not reflected in the consumer prices. When a manufacturer sets a price of a gun, it is not factoring in the public health costs for firearm injuries, the security costs for schools and religious institutions pay, and of course the incalculable price of gun deaths. These costs are often paid by the people who neither own guns nor profit from their trade. An efficient government should ensure that these costs are borne by the producers and consumers of firearms, not the 68% of Americans who do not own them. Do you think Greg owns a gun? I seriously doubt it. He says, even Republicans will embrace this proposal as a measure to increase public safety without infringing upon the Second Amendment. But given Republican opposition to tax hikes in general, let alone on guns, Democrat-only votes maneuver through the budget reconciliation process would be necessary. So they don't even care what the Republicans say. They want to pass this through reconciliation. An excise tax on weaponry and firearm buyback program are budgetary measures that fall well within the confines of the reconciliation and thus can be enacted by a simple majority of the Senate. In other words, going around the filibuster. Buybacks offers three defenses against court challenges, giving that the Supreme Court has embraced the notion, however misguided, that nothing can impede an individual's right to own or use firearms. So that gives you an idea of where they're headed. They're going to move away from regulation and they're going to move into this tax and just wipe out your Second Amendment right through taxes and other measures that they're going to try. And Greg doesn't care what the Supreme Court says. He wants to move forward on basically taking away your Second Amendment right. Of course, none of that will hold up. It won't survive a constitutional challenge. It is an idea of a de facto gun ban or gun restriction, no matter how you slice it up. If you like this type of content and analysis, please let me know. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time on Lawyered Up.